In this video, I'm gonna show you how to change your front disc brakes in a 2003 Toyota RAV4. The first thing that you're going to want to do is take off the lug nuts and take off the tire. Now you can use a lug nut wrench, an impact, or you can just do it the hard way. I'm so strong that I can just twist them off. The next thing that you're going to want to do is loosen the two bolts that actually connect the caliper to the caliper bracket. And those are located right here and then one down here as well. And once again, that connects this caliper to the bracket that is right next to it. They're a 14mm bolt and you're going to want to loosen those. These bolts here actually thread into pins, which ultimately help the caliper slide. So this is something that you want when it's put back together well lubricated. Once you've taken out the bolts to the back of the caliper, then you can just kind of pry back with a screwdriver and get the caliper up and out of the way. You actually don't want this caliper to hang by the brake line down here. You're better off tucking it up here. That ultimately will put less strain on the rubber brake line, which you obviously don't want. It's actually a good idea at this point to also take a picture of how the pads and the caliper bracket go in. That will provide you for a reference when you go to put on the new ones. And it is important to realize how the sliders, which are these little metal clip-like things, how those are in place, but also which direction the pads go. That is important so that they ride correctly on the sliders, and in turn you're getting a proper braking system. After that, there are two more larger 17mm bolts that hold in this bracket itself, and those are located right down here, and then there's one up here in the back, and those once again are a 17mm. You should be able to get a wrench on them no problem. Now is a great time to check your caliper bracket pins. Now these pins are located here and here, and they should be able to slide in and out. You can see this one, as I push it in, it kind of springs back out there. This one should also do that. So you can see this one's a little more stuck. That either means you need a new caliper bracket, or you can open this up and lubricate it so that it slides much easier. This is what allows the caliper to slide in and out of the rotor itself. So you want to make sure that these move and are well lubricated. You can see I just pulled it off, and this pin actually just goes deep inside. So if you put some grease and oil up in there to make it slide better and make sure this rubber boot kind of seals the grease inside, then you'll be good to go. So like I said, a quick fix on that is pull it all the way out and make sure that there's enough grease inside for it to slide perfectly. Now it's time to put on the new rotor if you have a new one. Now this one actually looks pretty good on the front here. For the most part, has pretty even wear, and to the touch, it looks good. However, on the back side, you can probably see through the camera that there is ridges, and this is not good. You want a smooth finish like this side here, and not a grooved finish like this side. So this rotor definitely needs to be replaced. Now, one thing I did to this brake bracket is I actually sandblasted inside these channels here. You can see that they are white in there. That's because that is where the pads are going to slide on little metal sliders. So I wanted to make sure that that area was clean so that when I put in the new metal sliders, they actually fit right into place. And when I sandblasted it, I did cover the two pins with electrical tape, make sure that no sand got in there. That's important because you want these pins to slide nice and smooth, and sandblasting media will pretty much prevent that. So you want to make sure that those are taped off so that these are still in good sliding position, for lack of better words. Make sure you refer to the pictures if you're not sure where these little metal sliders go, because it's important that you put these in the right place. Once you have the sliders in place, now I'm going to use a little bit of Never-Seez. I'll link this down in the description. This is essentially grease that will allow the pads to slide nice on this caliper bracket. Ultimately, this is something you should have around if you are doing a brake job. They sell them in little containers that are smaller than this, and you should definitely apply it to multiple surfaces when you're putting the brakes back together. So one of those surfaces will be right inside these sliders. So I'm going to take a little brush here and just brush it right in the middle of the sliders there. Nothing too heavy, but just enough to lubricate it so that the pads can slide much easier. At this point, what I'm going to do is slide just the bracket back into place and put in the two bolts that hold it in. The assembly process can easily be done with this caliper bracket in place. So I'm just gonna kind of get it in there hand tight at the moment, and we'll tighten down everything after. And these are the two 17mm bolts that we took out from the back. Next, it's time to actually slide in the pads, and I'm going to put right on the top of this pad, not on the pad part, but actually on the back iron part. That is where I'm going to put a little bit of this grease. The reason why is that is where the pad slides in these sliders. So make sure you refer to your pictures on how these pads actually go back in, because you want to make sure that they're in the same way as they were when you took them out, obviously with the new pads this time, and make sure they are sitting in the sliders correctly. If something is off with either the sliders or the pads, it will not brake correctly, and that's obviously something you don't want. At this point, if you're going to change your caliper, now would be the perfect time to do so. However, this caliper should be good to go, and we're going to use this one over. So I'm going to do a couple things to prep this to get it ready to go back on. And the first is take a little piece of sandpaper, and I'm just going to sand right here on the inside of the caliper, as well as the circle part that actually compresses. That's the piston part of it. I just want to clean those surfaces so that it's nice and smooth, and maybe the dust or the rust is no longer there. So I'm going to do that first. Next, what I'm going to do is use a caliper compression tool. That's what this tool is here. Now, if you don't have one of these, you can actually use a screwdriver, but what you're going to want to do is take this old pad, put it up against the piston part of the compressor, just like this. And then you're going to want to slide this in and ultimately compress the piston back. This is also a good way to tell that if this doesn't turn, that means that your caliper needs to be replaced. So you should be able to pry back for installation. It's important to note that at this point, you want to remember when you first get in the car, this piston then needs to compress. So the best thing you can do is fire up your car, and while in park, you want to pump the brake pedal about probably 5-6 times, and that will allow this piston to then compress again and then touch the pads. Right now it will be all the way back. So these pads, this prevents corrosion in the future. It also allows the pads to slide much nicer. I'm gonna slide and compress on the pads nicely. And it might be a little overkill, but I actually like to put a thin 14 millimeters that we took off first. Finally, when you're tightening down the bolts in the back, I like to use, I then attach another wrench on the bottom, and it allows me to pull it tight. Well, these ones you definitely want tight. After you've tightened all 4 of the bolts for the calipers are on there as well and torqued to spec or tight enough that they don't come loose, and you are good to go. Just remember to press the brake pedal probably about 5 or 6 times when you first get in the car so that the calipers compress on the new pads, no problem. It's very simple. With a couple tools, you can do this in your driveway on almost any car, and it's a great thing to know if you ever need your brakes done last minute. That's gonna be all for this video. Thank you for watching. Be sure to check out our merch at burnoutshow.com/store. You can find plenty of cool things, and also things like sweatshirts and shirts to do with the cars that we own. Thank you for the support. Hopefully this helped, and we will see you next time.